Chapter 24. Sybil, who was closest to the edge of the bed, rolled off and stepped onto the cold floor of the room. Not even the birds are awake yet, she murmured as she rooted around for the green dress that she'd carelessly cast off yesterday. I also hopped out of bed and pulled on my pants and my cotton Hulk shirt. Was relieved to be free of my armor for a day. Obviously loved wearing it, and it fit me like a glove, but there's no way I was going to walk around new jersey in it without attracting a lot of unwanted attention. I liked your sister, Tabitha said matter-of-factly as she stepped out of bed and pulled on her navy suede outfit. She seemed tough in a way. I liked that. In a woman. I smiled as I thought of all the heinous pranks we'd pulled on each other as children. Oh, she's tough all right, I laughed. Remind me to tell you some stories about growing up with her. But first, let's get these beans to Ava. You sure you'll be all right this time? Sybil asked Tabitha sweetly. Oh, I'm sure I will, Tabitha replied, but her voice belied a sense of fear. I've done the journey once before after all, so I'm sure my body will know what's in store. Don't worry, I said. It gets easier. It does, Sybil agreed as she claimed one of the sacks. Plus you were kind of drunk last time, which I'm sure didn't help. Tabitha rolled her eyes and dragged a sack of moonbeams into the center of my humble quarters. The noblewoman then gave me a raised eyebrow, which I met with a grin as I grabbed a third sack. I looked around before I twisted the ring just to be sure there wasn't something else I wanted to take. The room still looked like we'd hosted an all-night rager, but we could deal with that once we delivered the next round of beans to my sister. Everyone ready? I asked as I looked at the girls. Sybil was smoothing out her hair, whereas Tabitha hadn't bothered. Her blonde, curly hair stuck up in all directions, and she stood with one hand on her hip and one clutching the canvas sack of moonbeams. The level of attitude was truly inspiring. I'm all set, Sybil smiled. So am I, Tabitha yawned. But I'll be wanting a cup of moonbeam brew once we get to the shop. It's not like we don't have enough. Very true, I replied as I lifted my elbows so the girls could wrap their arms around mine. Here we go, I declared as I twisted the ring. The whole world turned black and I felt like I was hurtling backwards at 10,000 miles an hour. There was a brief moment of panic as the sensible part of my brain insisted that nothing good could happen from slamming into the ground that hard, but then the darkness evaporated and there was something solid beneath my feet. I opened my eyes and saw a cheap linoleum floor beneath me. The sound of lawnmowers whirred in the background, and it sounded like one of the faucets was dripping. Okay, I said. We landed in the kitchen this time. At least we keep landing in the house. Whoa, Tabitha said. That one was actually a lot easier than last time. Didn't I tell you? I laughed. Now let's drag these out to the Jeep Rayal. Quick, and then we'll go get the last 3 bags. As the girls and I dragged the giant sacks toward the front door, I decided I might have to invest in one of those handcarts that the UPS guys used. It had to be easier than trying to tug the cloth bags across my floor. When I opened the door, I saw the sky was still slightly pink from sunrise, though the heat was already starting to rise off the asphalt. It was early morning, but Ava would probably already be there to set up for the morning rush. I'll do the hauling, I said as I wrapped my arms around my sack. I picked up the sack of moonbeams, which must have been about 200 pounds, and carried it to the back of the Jeep. I fumbled around with the keys for a moment, but I finally got the back open and heaved the beans inside. How the hell did the squires get these sacks of beans to your quarters? Sybil asked as I scooped up her sack of beans. None of the squires I've seen look like they could carry a single brick, much less one of these sacks. Those squires are deceptively strong, Tabitha mused as she followed behind me with her own sack. That, or they get some of the hybrid guards to do it. I tossed Sybil's sack on top of mine and then added Tabitha's. I was covered in sweat by the time I was finished, but I figured each bag was probably worth $50,000, so I had a smile on my face when I loaded them in the Jeep and started back toward the front door. Right, I declared. Let's go get those last 3 sacks and then we'll head over to the store. I'm sure Ava will be happy to brew us a nice pot of bean brew. Fine, Tabitha huffed. Though you should know I was built for combat, not heavy lifting. Yeah, Sybil laughed. Well, I was built for prodding pigs. So. And with that, she cheekily poked Tabitha in the butt just as we got to the entryway of our house. Hey, Tabitha laughed and scampered back inside. I followed the girls inside and shut the door behind me. Then we headed to the kitchen, where we linked arms in our typical Wizard of Oz fashion for such journeys. Brace yourselves, I said and clutched the ring on my pinky finger. Once again, the world we were in was ripped from under us like a tablecloth. Felt like I was free-floating with no structure around me, until suddenly, once again there just was. We were back in my room in Lupercalia. This really is wondrous, Tabitha murmured. It never gets boring, I laughed. Okay, everyone grab a sack. I think I'm starting to like this way of travel, Sybil said as she dragged one of the bags to the center of the room. I like the feeling it gives me. First I hated it, but now I'm starting to crave the rush of adrenaline. I asked. I guess so, she shrugged. Whatever that is. Well, I replied. You're gonna love roller coasters then. Hell yeah. That was one of the best ideas I'd had in a while. At some point, I had to take these girls to one of the amusement parks just to see what their response was. But first things first. We had some beans to deliver, and then we'd have the rest of the day to do whatever we wanted. Ready? I asked as we linked arms. Ready, they replied in unison, Charlie's Angel style. I clutched the ring on my pinky, and Lupercalia was suddenly gone. It was like a cold wind was propelling us in every single direction at once. I wish I knew how this thing worked, but that was a question for a different time. Because suddenly, I was supported by a floor, and my kitchen spread out in front of us. To the Jeep, Sybil declared as she started to drag her sack across the floor. Be careful, I laughed. We don't want to poke a hole in the bag. We made it to the Jeep without losing any of the beans, and when I opened the back I was nearly overwhelmed with the amazing aroma of the beans we'd already tossed inside. There was no way something that delicious smelling wouldn't catch on, and I know I was grinning as I added our last 3 sacks of beans. There was just enough space for all 6 sacks, and I wondered if I'd need to buy a truck as well. If my plan worked, we'd be bringing a lot more coffee from Lupercalia, so I'd either need a bigger vehicle or be willing to make a lot more trips. I wonder if that movie is still playing, Tabitha mused. Or we could see a different one, Sybil suggested. Oh hey, I said as I unlocked the Jeep for the girls. That gives me an idea. You two go ahead and get in, and I'll be back in a moment. I ran back into the house and then stopped in the doorway as I tried to remember where I'd left my phone. When Tabitha had mentioned the movie, I'd realized that I could play the soundtrack for my girls, but only if I could find my cell phone. I hadn't used it in what felt like ages, and I hadn't really missed it, but this was another chance to let the girls enjoy a slice of life Jersey style. Kitchen, I murmured as I remembered my failed attempt to bring it to Lupercalia. I trotted back to the kitchen, and after checking the counters I finally found it in the fruit bowl on the table for some reason. I checked the charge, and while it wasn't at 100%, there was enough power that we could enjoy some music on our way to the shop. I was actually whistling as I returned to the Jeep, and I turned the engine on and was plugging in my phone before I realized that Tabitha was seated up front and Sybil was in the back. You've switched spots, I chuckled. I'm going to be the noble for a day, Sybil said in a faux drawl. And also, Tabitha wanted a better view. I've been here more times than her, so I only thought it fair. And I appreciate that, Tabitha replied. I'm also less shocked by the whole experience this time, and I really want to see New Jersey. Works for me, I said as I scrolled through Spotify. Okay, here we go. I pulled up the soundtrack for 10 Things I Hate About You, and a moment later the car boomed with the introductory drums to I Want You to Want Me by Letters to Cleo. Suddenly, both Sybil and Tabitha perked up in their seats and looked at each other. Wait, Tabitha said with more enthusiasm than I'd ever heard her say anything. This music. It's from the movie, Sybil squealed. It's the music from the movie. As I backed out of the driveway, both girls squealed and danced around in their seats as the vocals kicked in. It's like we're in the movie, Sybil declared. Hank, Tabitha said breathlessly as I coasted down my street without a care in the world. How did you make this song play here? It's magic. Well, I smiled and made a right onto Main Street. It truly is magic. The girls looked at each other for a moment, and Sybil looked like she was about to remind me that I'd once told her there was no magic in New Jersey. But the witch and the noblewoman both grinned instead and continued dancing and shouting out the few lyrics they knew. The hot summer sun, the girls singing in the car, and the sweet smell of those moonbeams really got to me. Life was so radically different to how it had been only a week ago that I couldn't even compare it. It was time to just roll with the punches and trust whatever the universe and the moon goddess had in store for me. Who are all those people? Sybil asked a moment later when we rounded the corner and saw a line stretching around the block. I don't think I've ever seen such a long line in New Jersey before. Neither have I replied, unless it was for Bruce Springsteen tickets. But that seemed an unlikely event for our small town, and I couldn't figure out what was going on until the bookshop came into view and I realized that the line that snaked down Main Street was there to get moonbeam brew. Suddenly I felt like I was high. A smile spread across my face. This was insane. Could the word have spread that quickly? Guys, I whispered as the final chords of Bad Reputation faded away. There, lining up for the moonbeam brew. Tabitha and Sybil exchanged a surprised look as we neared the coffee shop. Pulled into my usual spot and saw that Ava had opened both of the front doors of the bookshop. It was madness. I was hoping we could get these inside without anyone noticing, I said. Well, I don't think that's a real possibility, Sybil replied. We have handcarts inside we use for moving boxes around, I said. I could probably find an old tarp or something too. I can go get it, Sybil volunteered. I'll let Ava know we have the goods. That doesn't sound at all like a gangster stereotype, I laughed. But sure. Tell Ava we have the goods. She'll know what you're talking about. Sybil nearly sprinted from the Jeep before I'd even turned off the engine, and I watched her elbow her way into the store. You know, Tabitha remarked, I've never made friends with either a peasant or a man from New Jersey before. Well, I turned to her as we unfastened our seatbelts. I've never taken the virginity of a noblewoman either, so I guess we're even. She blushed bright red and looked at me as if I'd revealed some terrible secret. Hank, she whispered, you're making me blush. Just as long as I don't die in some bizarre accident arranged by your family, I laughed. Don't worry, she said. We only save that for other noble families. The noblewoman gave me a saucy grin as we stepped out of the Jeep, and I couldn't decide if she was serious or not. There wasn't much time to think about it though, because Sybil was soon back with one of the dollies that was usually buried beneath a stack of boxes in the basement, as well as an old blanket. I had to shove a bunch of boxes on the floor, Sybil said apologetically. But Ava said it didn't matter. And the line is getting longer. I glanced down the road as I heaved the first sack onto the dolly, and I saw that the witch was right. The line now disappeared around the corner, and I could see others hustling to join the crowd. Looks like we got here just in time, I said. We unloaded the rest of the sacks, and though the dolly groaned under the weight, we managed to get it moving. It took all three of us to maneuver it through the door, and we had to elbow more than a few people out of our way. But the first thing I noticed when I was inside was that the book displays had all been pushed to the outer edges of the shop, so there was more room for the line. Ava looked rushed already, and she didn't even look up as the wheels scraped against the floor. That'll be $12, please, my sister said as she handed a cup to one of the guys that worked in the antique place across the street. Thanks a bunch, the bald man smiled. I'll be back at lunchtime. It looks like we have a bestseller on our hands, I said as I cut in front of the next customer. I've had so many people in here the last couple of days that I'm not even sure what day it is, Ava said with a grin. But please tell me you have more beans. We have more beans, Sybil said and waved toward the dolly. Thank God, Ava sighed. You can just leave them there for now, but Hank can. You help me with something for a minute. But I thought I was on vacation, I teased. Sure, when there wasn't a line down the block for this moonbeam brew, Ava replied. So really this is all your fault. Fine, I said as I slipped behind the counter and smiled at the next customer. Let me just get Sybil and Tabitha a cup, and then we can talk. Do you see all these paying customers? Ava asked in disbelief. We can't just give it away, or everyone will expect a free coffee. They are the people who introduced us to the beans, I pointed out. And we've been up since before dawn to get more of those beans today, Tabitha added. Fine, Ava sighed, though I knew she hadn't really meant to begrudge my ladies their coffee, but only because your appearance was perfectly timed. You guys hadn't come, I would have sold out of coffee within the hour. So fill me in. I said as I emptied the contents of the coffee grinder into a coffee wand and pressed it into the drip. Basically, Ava said as she poured more beans into the grinder, we've made 2 months of profits in 2 days. Are you serious? I asked. And that's just from the sale of the coffee? Somehow this plan was going even better than I had anticipated. Yep, she whispered. And one of the New York Times food critics is supposed to be coming here tomorrow. Sales will be through the roof once his piece comes out. Already? I asked in disbelief. How did the Times hear about it? Who knows, she sighed. I mean, plenty of their employees live in New Jersey, I'm sure. Maybe one of them stopped in for a cup. Anyway, I'm glad you're back. You can explain where the beans are from and all that stuff. Because I sure as hell don't know anything about it. I hummed as I tried to figure out what I would even say. Don't do that while you're talking to them, Ava warned. They'll think you're smuggling in beans from North Korea or something. I grinned at my sister and decided that she was right. I couldn't lie about where the beans were from, so maybe I would just tell the reporter from the Times the whole story from the moment I ran into a burning building to the ring that teleported me to a world full of lords, vampires, and werewolves. I'd tell them that I had a magic bean estate in this other world, and that's where the beans came from. It was the best branding move ever. They'd think we were crazy storytelling mavericks who were way too cool to do some silly spiel on artisanal farming. And how our working practices differed from all the other coffee farmers was so outlandish that readers would just roll with it. I looked over the counter at Sybil, who was fingering another book on gardening. Then I looked back at Tabitha, who was sipping the fresh cup of moonbeam brew that she'd taken straight from the machine. We were making more money than we could have ever dreamed of. Business was booming, and I had 2 of the greatest ladies I could imagine by my side. I closed my eyes and took in a deep sniff of the fresh moonbeam brew. It was heavenly, and even better, it was going to make us richer than kings. I took a step back and looked at the growing line of people that were waiting patiently for just one sip of our magic brew. It felt like the whole town was on our side, and it felt like all of Lupercalia was on our side, too. I felt a smile spread across my face. It was only up from here. End of Book 1.